Chapter 6. Draco's Detour. Harry remained within the confines of the Burrows' garden over the next few weeks. He spent most of his days playing a two-a-side Quidditch in the Weasleys' orchard, he and Hermione against Ron and Ginny. Hermione was dreadful, and Ginny was good, so they were reasonably well matched, and his evenings eating triple helpings of everything Mrs. Weasley put in front of him. It would have been a happy, peaceful holiday, had it not been for the stories of disappearances, odd accidents, even of deaths now, appearing almost daily in the Prophet. Sometimes Bill and Mr. Weasley brought home news before it even reached the paper. To Mrs. Weasley's displeasure, Harry's 16th birthday celebrations were marred by grisly tidings brought to the party by Remus Lupin, who was looking gaunt and grim, his brown hair streaked liberally with grey, his clothes more ragged and patched than ever. "There have been another couple of Dementor attacks," he announced as Mrs. Weasley passed him a large slice of birthday cake. "And they've found Igor Karkaroff's body in a shack up north. The dark mark had been set over it. Well, frankly, I'm surprised he stayed alive for even a year after deserting the Death Eaters. Sirius's brother Regulus only managed a few days, as far as I can remember." "Yes, well," said Mrs. Weasley, frowning, "perhaps we should talk about something Did you hear about Florian Fortescue, Remus?" asked Bill, who was being plied with wine by Fleur. "The man who ran the ice cream place in Diagon Alley?" Harry interrupted, with an unpleasant hollow sensation in the pit of his stomach. "He used to give me free ice creams. What's happened to him?" "Dragged off, by the look of his place." "Why?" asked Ron, while Mrs. Weasley pointed glaringly at Bill. "Who knows? He must have upset them somehow. He was a good man, Florian." "Talking of Diagon Alley," said Mr. Weasley, "looks like Ollivander's gone too." "The wand-maker?" said Ginny, looking startled. "That's the one. Shop empty. No sign of a struggle. No one knows whether he left voluntarily or was kidnapped." "But wands, what'll people do for wands?" "They'll make do with other makers," said Lupin. "But Ollivander was the best, and if the other side has got him, it's not so good for us." The day after his rather gloomy birthday tea, their letters and book lists arrived from Hogwarts. Harry's included a surprise. He had been made Quidditch captain. "That gives you equal status with prefects!" cried Hermione happily. "You can use our special bathroom now and everything." "Wow, I remember when Charlie wore one of these," said Ron, examining the badge with glee. "Harry, this is so cool. You're my captain. If you let me back on the team, I suppose." "Well, I don't suppose we can put off a trip to Diagon Alley much longer now you've got these," sighed Mrs. Weasley, looking down at Ron's book list. "We'll go on Saturday as long as your father doesn't have to go into work again. I'm not going there without him." "Mom, you don't honestly think you know who's going to be hiding behind a bookshelf in Flourish and Blots?" sniggered Ron. "Fortescue and Ollivander went on holiday, did they?" said Mrs. Weasley, firing up at once. "If you think security's a laughing matter, you can stay behind and I'll get your things myself." No, I want to come. I want to see Fred and George's shop," said Ron hastily. "Then you just buck up your ideas, young man, before I decide you're too immature to come with us," said Mrs. Weasley angrily, snatching up her clock, all 9 hands of which were still pointing at mortal peril, and balancing it on top of a pile of just laundered towels. "And that goes for returning to Hogwarts as well." Ron turned to stare incredulously at Harry as his mother hoisted the laundry basket and the teetering clock into her arms and stormed out of the room. "Blimey, you can't even make a joke round here anymore." But Ron was careful not to be flippant about Voldemort over the next few days. Saturday dawned without any more outbursts from Mrs. Weasley, though she seemed very tense at breakfast. Bill, who would be staying at home with Fleur, much to Hermione and Ginny's pleasure, passed a full money bag across the table to Harry. "Where's mine?" demanded Ron at once, his eyes wide. "That's already Harry's, idiot," said Bill. "I got it out of your vault for you, Harry, because it's taking about 5 hours for the public to get their gold at the moment. The goblins have tightened security so much. 2 days ago, Philpott had a probity probe stuck up his... Well, trust me, this way's easier." "Thanks, Bill," said Harry, pocketing his gold. "He's always so thoughtful," purred Fleur adoringly, stroking Bill's nose. Jimmy mimed vomiting into her cereal behind Fleur. Harry choked over his cornflakes, and Ron thumped him on the back. It was an overcast, murky day. One of the special Ministry of Magic cars in which Harry had ridden once before was awaiting them in the front yard when they emerged from the house, pulling on their clothes. "Oh, it's good Dad can get us these again," said Ron appreciatively, stretching luxuriously as the car moved smoothly away from the burrow, Bill and Fleur waving from the kitchen window. He Harry, Hermione, and Ginny were all sitting in roomy comfort in the wide back seat. "Don't get used to it, it's only because of Harry," said Mr. Weasley over his shoulder. He and Mrs. Weasley were in front of the ministry driver. The front passenger seat had obligingly stretched into what resembled a two-seater sofa. "He's been giving top-grade security status, and will be joining up with additional security at the Leaky Cauldron, too." Harry said nothing. He did not much fancy doing his shopping while surrounded by a battalion of Aurors. He had stowed his invisibility cloak in his backpack and felt that if that was good enough for Dumbledore, it ought to be good enough for the Ministry. Though now he came to think of it, he was not sure the Ministry knew about his cloak. "Here you are, then," said the driver, a surprisingly short while later, speaking for the first time as he slowed in Charing Cross Road and stopped outside the Leaky Cauldron. "I'm to wait for you. Any idea how long you'll be?" "A couple of hours, I expect," said Mr. Weasley. "Ah, good. He's here." Harry imitated Mr. Weasley and peered through the window. His heart leapt. There were no Aurors waiting outside the inn, but instead the gigantic, black-bearded form of Rubeus Hagrid, the Hogwarts gamekeeper, wearing a long beaver-skin coat, beaming at the sight of Harry's face and oblivious to the startled stares of passing muggles. "Harry!" he boomed, sweeping Harry into a bone-crushing hug the moment Harry had stepped out of the car. "Buckbeak, Witherwings, I mean. You should see him, Harry. He's so happy to be back in the open air." "Glad he's pleased," said Harry, grinning as he massaged his ribs. "We didn't know security meant you." "I know, just like old times, innit? See, the Ministry wanted to send a bunch of Aurors, but Dumbledore said I do," said Hagrid proudly, throwing out his chest and tucking his thumbs into his pockets. "Let's get going, then. After you, Molly, Arthur." The Leaky Cauldron was, for the first time in Harry's memory, completely empty. Only Tom the landlord, wizened and toothless, remained of the old crowd. He looked up hopefully as they entered, but just before he could speak, Hagrid said importantly, "Just passing through today, Tom. Sure you understand. Hogwarts business, you know." Tom nodded gloomily and returned to wiping glasses. Harry, Hermione, Hagrid, and the Weasleys walked through the bar and out into the chilly little courtyard at the back, where the dustbins stood. Hagrid raised his pink umbrella and rapped a certain brick in the wall, which opened at once to form an archway onto a winding, cobbled street. They stepped through the entrance and paused, looking around. Diagon Alley had changed. The colorful, glittering window displays of spell books, potion ingredients, and cauldrons were lost to view, hidden behind the large Ministry of Magic posters that had been pasted over them. Most of these somber purple posters carried blown-up versions of the security advice on the Ministry pamphlets that had been sent out over the summer, but others bore moving black and white photographs of Death Eaters known to be on the loose. Bellatrix Lestrange was sneering from the front of the nearest apothecary. A few windows were boarded up, including those of Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. On the other hand, a number of shabby-looking stalls had sprung up along the street. The nearest one, which had been erected outside Flourish and Blott's, under a striped stained awning, had a cardboard sign pinned to its front. "Amulets, effective against werewolves, dementors, and inferi." A seedy-looking little wizard was rattling armfuls of silver symbols on chains at passerby. "One for your little girl, madam," he called at Mrs. Weasley as they passed, leering at Ginny. "Protect your pretty neck." "If I were on duty," said Mr. Weasley, glaring angrily at the amulet seller. "Yes, but don't go rescuing anyone now, dear. We're in a hurry," said Mrs. Weasley, nervously consulting a list. "I think we'd better go to Madame Malkin's first. Hermione wants new dress robes, and Ron's showing too much ankle in his school robes. And you must need new ones too, Harry. You've grown so much. Come on, everyone." "Molly, it doesn't make sense for us to all go to Madame Malkin's," said Mr. Weasley. "Why don't those three go with Hagrid, and we can go to Flourish and Blott's and get everyone's school books?" "I don't know," said Mrs. Weasley anxiously, clearly torn between a desire to finish the shopping quickly and the wish to stick together in a pack. "Hagrid, do you think—" "Don't fret, they'll be fine with me, Molly," said Hagrid soothingly, waving an airy hand the size of a dustbin lid. Mrs. Weasley did not look entirely convinced, but allowed the separation, scurrying off toward Flourish and Blott's with her husband and Ginny, while Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Hagrid set off for Madame Malkin's. Harry noticed that many of the people who passed them had the same harried, anxious looks as Mrs. Weasley, and that nobody was stopping to talk anymore. The shoppers stayed together in their own tightly knit groups, moving intently about their business. Nobody seemed to be shopping alone. "Might be a bit of squeeze in there with all of us," said Hagrid, stopping outside Madame Malkin's and bending down to peer through the window. "I'll stand guard outside, all right?" So Harry, Ron, and Hermione entered the little shop together. It appeared at first to be empty, But no sooner had the door swung shut behind them than they heard a familiar voice issuing from behind a rack of dress robes in spangled green and blue. "Not a child, in case you haven't noticed, Mother. I am perfectly capable of doing my own shopping alone." There was a clucking noise, and a voice Harry recognized as that of Madame Malkin, the owner, said, "Now, dear, your mother's quite right. None of us is supposed to go wandering around on our own anymore. It's nothing to do with being a child. Watch where you're sticking that pin, will you?" A teenage boy with a pale, pointed face and white blonde hair appeared from behind the rack, wearing a handsome set of dark green robes that glittered with pins around the hem and the edges of the sleeves. He strode to the mirror and examined himself. It was a few moments before he noticed Harry, Ron, and Hermione reflected over his shoulder. His light grey eyes narrowed. "If you're wondering what that smell is, Mother, a mudblood just walked in," said Draco Malfoy. "I don't think there's any need for language like that," said Madame Malkin, scurrying up from behind the clothes rack, holding a tape measure and a wand. "And I don't want wands drawn in my shop, either," she added hastily, for her glance toward the door had shown her Harry and Ron both standing there with their wands out and pointing at Malfoy. Hermione, who was standing slightly behind them, whispered, "No, don't. Honestly, it's not worth it." "Yeah, like you dare do magic out of school," sneered Malfoy. "Who blacked your eye, Granger? I want to send them flowers." "That's quite enough," said Madame Malkin sharply, looking over her shoulder for support. "Madam, please." Narcissa Malfoy strolled up from behind the clothes rack. "Put those away," she said coldly to Harry and Ron. "If you attack my son again, I shall ensure that it is the last thing you ever do." "Really?" said Harry, taking a step forward and gazing into the smoothly arrogant face that, for all its pallor, still resembled her sister's. He was as tall as she was now. "Going to get a few Death Eater pals to do us in, are you?" Madame Malkin squealed and clutched at her heart. "Really, you shouldn't accuse. Dangerous thing to say. Wands away, please." But Harry did not lower his wand. Narcissa Malfoy smiled unpleasantly. "I see that being Dumbledore's favorite has given you a false sense of security, Harry Potter. But Dumbledore won't always be there to protect you." Harry looked mockingly all around the shop. "Wow, look at that. He's not here now. So why not have a go? They might be able to find you a double cell in Azkaban with your loser of a husband." Malfoy made an angry movement toward Harry, but stumbled over his overlong robe. Ron laughed loudly. "Don't you dare talk to my mother like that, Potter!" Malfoy snarled. "It's all right, Draco," said Narcissa, restraining him with her thin white fingers upon his shoulder. "I expect Potter will be reunited with dear Sirius before I am reunited with Lucius." Harry raised his wand higher. "Harry, no!" moaned Hermione, grabbing his arm and attempting to push it down by his side. "Think, you mustn't. You'll be in such trouble." Madame Malkin dithered for a moment on the spot, then seemed to decide to act as though nothing was happening in the hope that it wouldn't. She bent toward Malfoy, who was still glaring at Harry. "I think this left sleeve could come up a little bit more, dear. Let me just—" "Ouch!" bellowed Malfoy, slapping her hand away. "Watch where you're putting your pins, woman!" "Mother, I don't think I want these anymore." He pulled the robes over his head and threw them onto the floor at Madame Malkin's feet. "You're right, Draco," said Narcissa with a contemptuous glance at Hermione. "Now I know the kind of scum that shops here. We'll do better at Twilfit and Tattings." And with that the pair of them strode out of the shop, Malfoy taking care to bang as hard as he could into Ron on the way out. "Well, really," said Madame Malkin, snatching up the fallen robes and moving the tip of her wand over them like a vacuum cleaner, so that it removed all the dust. She was distracted all through the fitting of Ron's and Harry's new robes, tried to sell Hermione wizard's dress robes instead of witches', and when she finally bowed them out of the shop, it was with an air of being glad to see the back of them. "Got everything?" asked Hagrid brightly when they reappeared at his side. "Just about," said Harry. "Did you see the Malfoys?" "Yeah," said Hagrid unconcerned. "But they wouldn't dare make trouble in the middle of Diagon Alley, Harry. Don't worry about them." Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged looks, but before they could disabuse Hagrid of this comfortable notion, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley and Ginny appeared, all clutching heavy packages of books. "All right, everyone," said Mrs. Weasley. "Got your robes? Right. Then we can pop in at the apothecary in Ilops on the way to Fred and George's. Stick close now." Neither Harry nor Ron bought any ingredients at the apothecary, seeing as they were no longer studying potions, but both bought large boxes of owl nuts for Hedwig and Pigwidgeon at Ilops' Owl Emporium. Then, with Mrs. Weasley checking her watch every minute or so, They headed farther along the street in search of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, the joke shop run by Fred and George. "We haven't really got too long," Mrs. Weasley said, "so we'll just have a quick look around and then back to the car. We must be close. That's 92, 94. "Whoa," said Ron, stopping in his tracks. Set against the dull, poster-muffled shop fronts around them, Fred and George's windows hit the eye like a firework display. Casual passerby were looking back over their shoulders at the windows, and a few rather stunned-looking people had actually come to a halt, transfixed. The left-hand window was dazzlingly full of an assortment of goods that revolved, popped, flashed, bounced, and shrieked. Harry's eyes began to water just looking at it. The right-hand window was covered with a gigantic poster, purple like those of the Ministry, but emblazoned with flashing yellow letters. "Why are you worrying about you-know-who? You should be worrying about you-know-poo, the constipation sensation that's gripping the nation." Harry started to laugh. He heard a weak sort of moan beside him and looked around to see Mrs. Weasley gazing dumbfounded at the poster. Her lips moved silently, mouthing the name, "You-know-poo. They'll be murdered in their beds," she whispered. "No, they won't," said Ron, who, like Harry, was laughing. "This is brilliant." And he and Harry led the way into the shop. It was packed with customers. Harry could not get near the shelves. He stared around, looking up at the boxes piled to the ceiling. There were skiving snack boxes that the twins had perfected during their last unfinished year at Hogwarts. Harry noticed that the Nosebleed Nougat was most popular, with only one battered box left on the shelf. There were bins full of trick wands, and the cheapest merely turning into rubber chickens or pairs of briefs when waved, the most expensive beating the unwary user around the head and neck, and boxes of quills which came in self-inking, spell-checking, and smart answer varieties. A space cleared in the crowd, and Harry pushed his way toward the counter, where a gaggle of delighted 10-year-olds was watching a tiny little wooden man slowly ascending the steps to a real set of gallows, both perched on a box that read, "Reusable Hangman. Spell it, or he'll swing." Patented daydream charms. Hermione had managed to squeeze through to a large display near the counter that was reading the information on the back of a box, bearing a highly colored picture of a handsome youth and a swooning girl who were standing on the deck of a pirate ship. "One simple incantation, and you will enter a top-quality, highly realistic 30-minute daydream, easy to fit into the average school lesson and virtually undetectable. Side effects include vacant expression and minor drooling. Not for sale to under 16s. "You know," said Hermione, looking up at Harry, "this really is extraordinary magic." "For that, Hermione," said a voice behind them, "you can have one for free." A beaming Fred stood before them, wearing a set of magenta robes that clashed magnificently with his flaming hair. "How are you, Harry?" They shook hands. "And what's happened to your eye, Hermione?" "Your punching telescope," she said ruefully. "Oh, blimey, I forgot about those," said Fred. "Here." He pulled the tub out of his pocket and handed it to her. She unscrewed it gingerly to reveal a thick yellow paste. "Just dab it on. The bruise will be gone within the hour," said Fred. "We had to find a decent bruise remover. We're testing most of our products on ourselves." Hermione looked nervous. "It is safe, isn't it?" she asked. "Of course it is," said Fred bracingly. "Come on, Harry, I'll give you a tour." Harry left Hermione dabbing her black eye with paste and followed Fred toward the back of the shop where he saw a stand of card and rope tricks. "Muggle magic tricks," said Fred happily, pointing them out. "For freaks like Dad, you know, who love Muggle stuff. It's not a big earner, but we do fairly steady business. They're great novelties. Oh, here's George." Fred's twin shook Harry's hand energetically. "Giving him the tour? Come for the back, Harry. That's where we're making the real money." "Pocket anything, you, and you'll pay in more than galleons," he added warningly to a small boy who hastily whipped his hand out of the tub labeled Edible Dark Marks. "They'll make anyone sick." George pushed back a curtain beside the Muggle tricks, and Harry saw a darker, less crowded room. The packaging on the products lining these shelves was more subdued. "We've just developed this more serious line," said Fred. "Funny how it happened. You wouldn't believe how many people, even who work at the Ministry, can't do a decent shield charm," said George. "Of course, they didn't have you teaching them, Harry." "That's right. Well, we thought shield hats were a bit of a laugh, you know. Challenge your mate to a jinx while wearing it and watch his face when the jinx just bounces off. But the Ministry bought 500 for all its support staff, and we're still getting massive orders. So we've expanded into a range of shield cloaks, shield gloves. I mean, they wouldn't help much against the unforgivable curses, but for minor and moderate hexes or jinxes. And then we thought we'd get into a whole area of defense against the dark arts because it's such a money spinner. continued George enthusiastically. "This is cool. Look, instant darkness powder. We're importing it from Peru. Handy if you want to make a quick escape. And our decoy detonators are just walking off the shelves. Look," said Fred, pointing at a number of weird-looking black horn-type objects that were indeed attempting to scurry out of sight. "You just drop one surreptitiously, and it'll run off and make a nice loud noise out of sight, giving you a diversion if you need one." "Handy," said Harry, impressed. "Here," said George, catching a couple and throwing them to Harry. A young witch with short blonde hair poked her head around the curtain. Harry saw that she too was wearing magenta staff robes. There's a customer out here looking for a joke cauldron, Mr. Weasley and Mr. Weasley," she said. Harry found it very odd to hear Fred and George called Mr. Weasley, but they took it in their stride. "Right you are, Verity, I'm coming," said George promptly. "Harry, you help yourself to anything you want, all right? No charge." "I can't do that," said Harry, who had already pulled out his money bag to pay for the decoy detonators. "You don't pay here," said Fred firmly, waving away Harry's gold. "But you gave us our startup loan. We haven't forgotten," said George sternly. "Take whatever you like, and just remember to tell people where you got it if they ask." George swept off through the curtain to help with the customers, and Fred led Harry back into the main part of the shop to find Hermione and Ginny still poring over the patented Daydream charms. "Haven't you girls found our special Wonder Witch products yet?" asked Fred. "Follow me, ladies." Near the window was an array of violently pink products around which a cluster of excited girls was giggling enthusiastically. Hermione and Ginny both hung back, looking wary. "There you go," said Fred proudly. "Best range of love potions you'll find anywhere." Ginny raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Do they work?" she asked. "Certainly they work, for up to 24 hours at a time, depending on the weight of the boy in question." "And the attractiveness of the girl," said George, reappearing suddenly at their side. "But we're not selling them to our sister," he added, becoming suddenly stern. "Not when she's already got about 5 boys on the go from Whatever you've heard from Ron is a big fat lie," said Ginny, calmly, leaning forward to take a small pink pot off the shelf. "What's this?" "Guaranteed 10-second pimple vanisher," said Fred. "Excellent on everything from boils to blackheads, but don't change the subject. Are you, or are you not, currently going out with a boy called Dean Thomas?" "Yes, I am," said Ginny. "And last time I looked, he was definitely 1 boy, not 5. "What are those?" She was pointing at a number of round balls of fluff in shades of pink and purple, all rolling around the bottom of a cage and emitting high-pitched squeaks. "Pygmy puffs," said George. "Miniature puffskeins. We can't breed them fast enough." "So what about Michael Corner?" "I dumped him. He was a bad loser," said Ginny, putting a finger through the bars of the cage and watching the pygmy puffs crowd around it. "They're really cute." "They're fairly cuddly, yes," conceded Fred. "But you're moving through boyfriends a bit fast, aren't you?" Ginny turned to look at him, her hands on her hips. There was such a Mrs. Weasley-ish glare on her face that Harry was surprised Fred didn't recoil. "It's none of your business. And I'll thank you," she added angrily to Ron, who had just appeared at George's elbow, laden with merchandise, "not to tell tales about me to these two." "That's 3 galleons, 9 sickles, and a nut," said Fred, examining the many boxes in Ron's arms. "Cough up." "I'm your brother." "And that's our stuff you're nicking. 3 galleons, 9 sickles. I'll knock off the nut." "But I haven't got 3 galleons, 9 sickles." "You'd better put it back then. And mind you put it on the right shelves." Ron dropped several boxes, swore, and made a rude hand gesture at Fred that was unfortunately spotted by Mrs. Weasley, who had chosen that moment to appear. "If I see you do that again, I'll jinx your fingers together," she said sharply. "Mum, can I have a pygmy puff?" said Ginny at once. A what?" said Mrs. Weasley warily. "Look, they're so sweet." Mrs. Weasley moved aside to look at the pygmy puffs, and Harry, Ron, and Hermione momentarily had an unimpeded view of the window. Draco Malfoy was hurrying up the street alone. As he passed Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, he glanced over his shoulder. Seconds later, he moved beyond the scope of the window, and they lost sight of him. "Wonder where his mummy is," said Harry, frowning. "Giving her the slip by the looks of it," said Ron. "Why, though?" said Hermione. Harry said nothing. He was thinking too hard. Narcissa Malfoy would not have let her precious son out of her sight willingly. Malfoy must have made a real effort to free himself from her clutches. Harry, knowing and loathing Malfoy, was sure the reason could not be innocent. He glanced around. Mrs. Weasley and Ginny were bending over the pygmy puffs. Mrs. Weasley was delightedly examining a pack of muggle-marked playing cards. Fred and George were both helping customers. On the other side of the glass, Hagrid was standing with his back to them, looking up and down the street. "Get under here, quick," said Harry, pulling his invisibility cloak out of his bag. "Oh, I don't know, Harry, said Hermione, looking uncertainly toward Mrs. Weasley. Come on, said Ron. She hesitated for a second longer, then ducked under the cloak with Harry and Ron. Nobody noticed them vanish. They were all too interested in Fred and George's products. Harry, Ron, and Hermione squeezed their way out of the door as quickly as they could, but by the time they gained the street, Malfoy had disappeared just as successfully as they had. He was going in that direction, murmured Harry as quietly as possible, so that the humming Hagrid would not hear them. Come on. They scurried along, peering left and right through shop windows and doors, until Hermione pointed ahead. That's him, isn't it? She whispered, turning left. Big surprise, whispered Ron, for Malfoy had glanced around, then slid into Knockturn Alley and out of sight. Quick, or we'll lose him, said Harry, speeding up. Our feet'll be seen, said Hermione anxiously as the cloak flapped a little around their ankles. It was much more difficult hiding all three of them under the cloak nowadays. It doesn't matter, said Harry impatiently. Just hurry. But Knockturn Alley, the side street devoted to the dark arts, looked completely deserted. They peered into windows as they passed, but none of the shops seemed to have any customers at all. Harry supposed it was a bit of a giveaway in these dangerous and suspicious times to buy dark artifacts, or at least to be seen buying them. Hermione gave his arm a sharp pinch. Ouch! Shh! Look, he's in there, she breathed in Harry's ear. They had drawn level with the only shop in Knockturn Alley that Harry had ever visited, Borgin and Burke's, which was sold a wide variety of sinister objects. There in the midst of the cases, full of skulls and old bottles, stood Draco Malfoy with his back to them, just visible beyond the very same large black cabinet in which Harry had once hidden to avoid Malfoy and his father. Judging by the movements of Malfoy's hands, he was talking animatedly. The proprietor of the shop, Mr. Borgin, an oily-haired, stooping man, stood facing Malfoy. He was wearing a curious expression of mingled resentment and fear. If only we could hear what they're saying, said Hermione. We can, said Ron excitedly. Hang on. Damn. He dropped a couple more boxes he was still clutching as he fumbled with the largest. Extendable ears, look. Fantastic, said Hermione as Ron unraveled the long, flesh-colored strings and began to feed them toward the bottom of the door. Oh, I hope the door isn't impenetrable. No, said Ron gleefully. Listen. They put their heads together and listened intently to the ends of the strings, through which Malfoy's voice could be heard loud and clear, as though a radio had been turned on. You know how to fix it? Possibly, said Borgin in a tone that suggested he was unwilling to commit himself. I'll need to see it, though. Why don't you bring it into the shop? I can't, said Malfoy. It's got to stay put. I just need you to tell me how to do it. Harry saw Borgin lick his lips nervously. Well, without seeing it, I must say it will be a very difficult job. Perhaps impossible. I couldn't guarantee anything. No, said Malfoy, and Harry knew just by his tone that Malfoy was sneering. Perhaps this will make you more confident. He moved toward Borgin and was blocked from view by the cabinet. Harry, Ron, and Hermione shuffled sideways to try and keep him in sight, but all they could see was Borgin, looking very frightened. Tell anyone, said Malfoy, and there will be retribution. You know Fenrir Greyback? He's a family friend. He'll be dropping in from time to make sure you're giving the problem your full attention. There will be no need for... I'll decide that, said Malfoy. Well, I'd better be off. And don't forget to keep that one safe. I'll need it. Perhaps you would like to take it now? No, of course I wouldn't, you stupid little man. How would I look carrying that down the street? Just don't sell it. Of course not. Sir. Borgin made a bow as deep as the one Harry had once seen him give Lucius Malfoy. Not a word to anyone, Borgin. And that includes my mother. Understand? Naturally, murmured Borgin, bowing again. Next moment, the bell over the door tinkled loudly as Malfoy stalked out of the shop, looking very pleased with himself. He passed so close to Harry, Ron, and Hermione that they felt the cloak flutter around their knees again. Inside the shop, Borgin remained frozen. His unctuous smile had vanished. He looked worried. What was that about? Whispered Ron, reeling in the extendable ears. Dunno, said Harry, thinking hard. He wants something mended. He wants to reserve something there. Could you see what he pointed at when he said that one? No, he was behind the cabinet. You two stay here, whispered Hermione. What are you... But Hermione had already ducked up from under the cloak. She checked her hair in the reflection in the glass, then marched into the shop, setting the bell tinkling again. Ron hastily fed the extendable ears back under the door and passed one of the strings to Harry. Hello. Horrible morning, isn't it? Hermione said brightly to Borgin, who did not answer, but cast her a suspicious look. Humming cheerily, Hermione strolled through the jumble of objects on display. "Is this necklace for sale?" she asked, pausing beside a glass-fronted case. "If you've got 1,500 galleons," said Mr. Borgin coldly. "Oh, no, I haven't got quite that much," said Hermione, walking on. "And, what about this lovely skull?" 16 galleons. "So it's for sale, then? It isn't being kept for anyone?" Mr. Borgin squinted at her. Harry had the nasty feeling he knew exactly what Hermione was up to. Apparently, Hermione felt she was being rumbled too, because she suddenly threw caution to the winds. "The thing is that boy who was in here just now, Draco Malfoy, well, he's a friend of mine, and I want to get him a birthday present. But if he's already reserved anything, I obviously don't want to get him the same thing. So, It was a pretty lame story in Harry's opinion, and apparently Borgin thought so too. "Out," he said sharply. "Get out!" Hermione did not wait to be asked twice, but hurried to the door with Borgin at her heels. As the bell tinkled again, Borgin slammed the door behind her and put up a closed sign. "Oh, well," said Ron, throwing the cloak back over Hermione. "Worth a try, but you were a bit obvious." "Well, next time you can show me how it's done, Master of Mystery," she snapped. Ron and Hermione bickered all the way back to Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, where they were forced to stop so that they could dodge undetected around a very anxious-looking Mrs. Weasley and Hagrid, who had clearly noticed their absence. Once in the shop, Harry whipped off the invisibility cloak, hid it in his bag, and joined in with the other two when they insisted, in answer to Mrs. Weasley's accusations, that they had been in the back room all along, and that she could not have looked properly. Chapter 7. The Slug Club. Harry spent a lot of the last week of the holidays pondering the meaning of Malfoy's behavior in Knockturn Alley. What disturbed him most was the satisfied look on Malfoy's face as he had left the shop. Nothing that made Malfoy look that happy could be good news. To his slight annoyance, however, neither Ron nor Hermione seemed quite as curious about Malfoy's activities as he was, or at least they seemed to get bored of discussing it after a few days. "Yes, I've already agreed it was fishy, Harry," said Hermione a little impatiently. She was sitting on the windowsill in Fred and George's room with her feet up on the cardboard boxes and had only grudgingly looked up from her new copy of Advanced Rune Translation. "But haven't we agreed there could be a lot of explanations?" "Maybe he's broken his hand of glory," said Ron vaguely as he attempted to straighten his broomstick's bent tail twigs. "Remember that shriveled up arm Malfoy had?" "But what about when he said, 'Don't forget to keep that one safe'?" asked Harry for the umpteenth time. "That sounded to me like Borgin's got another one of these broken objects, and Malfoy wants both." "You reckon?" said Ron, now trying to scrape some dirt off his broom handle. "Yeah, I do," said Harry. When neither Ron nor Hermione answered, he said, "Malfoy's father's in Azkaban. Don't you think Malfoy would like revenge?" Ron looked up, blinking. "Malfoy? Revenge? What can he do about it?" "That's my point. I don't know," said Harry, frustrated. "But he's up to something, and I think we should take it seriously. His father's a Death Eater, and—" Harry broke off, his eyes fixed on the window behind Hermione, his mouth open. A startling thought had just occurred to him. "Harry?" said Hermione in an anxious voice. "What's wrong?" "Your scar's not hurting again, is it?" asked Ron nervously. "He's a Death Eater," said Harry slowly. "He's replaced his father as a Death Eater." There was silence. Then Ron erupted in laughter. "Malfoy? He's 16, Harry! You think you know who would let Malfoy join?" "It seems very unlikely, Harry," said Hermione in a repressive sort of voice. "What makes you think—" "In Madame Malkin's. She didn't touch him, but he yelled and jerked his arm away from her when she went to roll up his sleeve. It was his left arm. He's been branded with the Dark Mark." Ron and Hermione looked at each other. "Well," said Ron, sounding thoroughly unconvinced. I think he just wanted to get out of there, Harry," said Hermione. "He showed Borgin something we couldn't see," Harry pressed on stubbornly. "Something that seriously scared Borgin. It was the mark. I know it. He was showing Borgin who he was dealing with. You saw how seriously Borgin took him." Ron and Hermione exchanged another look. "I'm not sure, Harry." "Yeah, I still don't reckon you know who would let Malfoy join." Annoyed but absolutely convinced he was right, Harry snatched up a pile of filthy Quidditch robes and left the room. Mrs. Weasley had been urging them for days not to leave their washing and packing until the last moment. On the landing, he bumped into Ginny, who was returning to her room carrying a pile of freshly laundered clothes. "I wouldn't go into the kitchen just now," she warned him. "There's a lot of phlegm around." "I'll be careful not to slip in it," Harry smiled. Sure enough, when he entered the kitchen, it was to find Fleur sitting at the kitchen table in full flow about plans for her wedding to Bill, while Mrs. Weasley kept watch over a pile of self-peeling sprouts, looking bad-tempered. Bill and I have almost decided on only 2 bridesmaids. Ginny and Gabrielle will look very sweet together. I am thinking of dressing them in pale gold. Pink would, of course, be horrible with Ginny's hair. Harry, said Mrs. Weasley loudly, cutting across Fleur's monologue. Good, I want to explain about the security arrangements for the journey to Hogwarts tomorrow. We've got ministry cars again, and there will be Aurors waiting at the station. Is Tonks going to be there? Asked Harry, handing over his Quidditch things. No, I don't think so. She's been stationed somewhere else, from what Arthur said. She has let herself go, that Tonks, Fleur mused, examining her own stunning reflection in the back of a teaspoon. A big mistake, if you ask. Yes, thank you, said Mrs. Weasley tartly, cutting across Fleur again. You better get on, Harry. I want the trunks ready tonight, if possible, so we don't have the usual last-minute scramble. And in fact, their departure the following morning was smoother than usual. The ministry cars glided up to the front of the burrow to find them waiting, trunks packed, Hermione's cat Crookshanks safely enclosed in his traveling basket, and Hedwig, Ron's owl, Pigwidgeon, and Ginny's new purple pygmy puff, Arnold, in cages. Au revoir, Harry, said Fleur throatily, kissing him goodbye. Ron hurried forward, looking hopeful, but Ginny stuck out her foot, and Ron fell sprawling in the dust at Fleur's feet. Furious, red-faced, and dirt-spattered, he hurried into the car without saying goodbye. There was no cheerful Hagrid waiting for them at King's Cross Station. Instead, 2 grim-faced, bearded Aurors in dark Muggle suits moved forward the moment the car stopped and, flanking the party, marched them into the station without speaking. Quick, through the barrier, said Mrs. Weasley, who seemed a little flustered by this austere efficiency. Harry, you had better go first, She looked inquiringly at the Aurors, who nodded briefly, seized Harry's upper arm, and attempted to steer him toward the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. I can walk, thanks, said Harry irritably, jerking his arm out of the Auror's grip. He pushed his trolley directly at the solid barrier, ignoring his silent companion, and found himself a second later standing on platform 9 3/4, where the Scarlet Hogwarts Express stood belching steam over the crowd. Hermione and the Weasleys joined him within seconds. Without waiting to consult his grim-faced Auror, Harry motioned to Ron and Hermione to follow him up the platform, looking for an empty compartment. We can't, Harry, said Hermione, looking apologetic. Ron and I have got to go to the prefect's carriage first, and then patrol the corridors for a bit. Oh, yeah, I forgot, said Harry. You better get straight on the train, all of you. You've only got a few minutes to go, said Mrs. Weasley, consulting her watch. Well, have a lovely term, Ron. Mr. Weasley, can I have a quick word? Said Harry, making up his mind on the spur of the moment. Of course, said Mr. Weasley, looking slightly surprised, but followed Harry out of earshot of the others nevertheless. Harry had thought it through carefully and come to the conclusion that if he was to tell anyone, Mr. Weasley was the right person. Firstly, because he worked at the ministry and was therefore in the best position to make further investigations. And secondly, because he thought there was not too much risk of Mr. Weasley exploding with anger. He could see Mrs. Weasley and the grim-faced Auror casting this pair of them suspicious looks as they moved away. When we were in Diagon Alley, Harry began, but Mr. Weasley forestalled him with a grimace. Am I about to discover where you, Ron and Hermione, disappeared while you were supposed to be in the back room of Fred and George's shop? How did you... Harry, please. You're talking to the man who raised Fred and George. Yeah. All right, we weren't in the back room. Very well, let's hear the worst. Well, we followed Draco Malfoy. We used my invisibility cloak. Did you have any particular reason for doing so, or was it a mere whim? Because I thought Malfoy was up to something, said Harry, disregarding Mr. Weasley's look of mingled exasperation and amusement. He'd given his mother the slip, and I wanted to know why. Of course you did, said Mr. Weasley, sounding resigned. Well, did you find out why? He went into Borgin and Burke's, said Harry, and started bullying the bloke in there, Borgin, to help him fix something. And he said he wanted Borgin to keep something else for him. He made it sound like it was the same kind of thing that needed fixing, like they were a pair. And Harry took a deep breath. There's something else. We saw Malfoy jump about a mile when Madame Malkin tried to touch his left arm. I think he's been branded with the Dark Mark. I think he's replaced his father as a Death Eater. Mr. Weasley looked taken aback. After a moment, he said, Harry, I doubt whether You-Know-Who would allow a 16-year-old. Does anybody really know what You-Know-Who would or wouldn't do? Asked Harry angrily. Mr. Weasley, I'm sorry, but isn't it worth investigating? If Malfoy wants something fixing, and he needs to threaten Borgin to get it done, it's probably something dark or dangerous, isn't it? I doubt it, to be honest, Harry, said Mr. Weasley slowly. You see, when Lucius Malfoy was arrested, we raided his house. We took away everything that might have been dangerous. I think you missed something, said Harry stubbornly. Well, maybe, said Mr. Weasley, but Harry could tell that Mr. Weasley was humoring him. There was a whistle behind them. Nearly everyone had boarded the train and the doors were closing. You better hurry, said Mr. Weasley, as Mrs. Weasley cried, Harry, quickly! He hurried forward, and Mr. and Mrs. Weasley helped him load his trunk onto the train. Now, dear, you're coming to us for Christmas. It's all fixed with Dumbledore, so we'll see you quite soon, said Mrs. Weasley through the window as Harry slammed the door shut behind him, and the train began to move. You make sure you look after yourself, and... The train was gathering speed. Be good, and... She was jogging to keep up now. Stay safe! Harry waved until the train had turned a corner, and Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were lost to view, then turned to see where the others had got to. He supposed Ron and Hermione were cloistered in the prefect's carriage, but Ginny was a little way along the corridor, chatting to some friends. Harry made his way toward her, dragging his trunk. People stared shamelessly as he approached. They even pressed their faces against the windows of their compartments to get a look at him. He had expected an upswing in the amount of gaping and gawping he would have to endure this term after all the Chosen One rumors in the Daily Prophet, but he did not enjoy the sensation of standing in a very bright spotlight. He tapped Ginny on the shoulder. Fancy trying to find a compartment? I can't, Harry. I've said I would meet Dean, said Ginny brightly. I'll see you later. Right, said Harry. He felt a strange twinge of annoyance as she walked away, her long red hair dancing behind her. He had become so used to her presence over the summer that he had almost forgotten that Ginny did not hang around with him, Ron, and Hermione while at school. Then he blinked and looked around. He was surrounded by mesmerized girls. Hi, Harry, said a familiar voice from behind him. Neville, said Harry in relief, turning to see a round-faced boy struggling toward him. Hello, Harry, said a girl with long hair and large misty eyes who was just behind Neville. Luna, hi, how are you? Very well, thank you, said Luna. She was clutching a magazine to her chest. Large letters on the front announced that there was a pair of free Spectraspecs inside. Quibbler still growing strong, then? Said Harry, who felt a certain fondness for the magazine, having given it an exclusive interview the previous year. Oh, yes, circulation's well up, said Luna happily. Let's find seats, said Harry, and the three of them set off along the train through hordes of silently staring students. At last they found an empty compartment, and Harry hurried inside gratefully. They're even staring at us, said Neville, indicating himself and Luna. That's because we're with you. They're staring at you because you were at the Ministry too, said Harry, as he hoisted his trunk into the luggage rack. Our little adventure there was all over the Daily Prophet. You must have seen it. Yes, I thought Gran would be angry about all the publicity, said Neville, but she was really pleased. Says I'm starting to live up to my dad at long last. She brought me a new wand, look. He pulled it out and showed it to Harry. Cherry and unicorn hair, he said proudly. We think it was one of the last Ollivander ever sold. He vanished the next day. Oi, come back here, Trevor! And he dived under the seat to retrieve his toad as it made one of its frequent bids for freedom. Are we still doing DA meetings this year, Harry? Asked Luna, who was detaching a pair of psychedelic spectacles from the middle of the Quibbler. No point now we've got rid of Umbridge, is there? Said Harry, sitting down. Neville bumped his head against the seat as he emerged from under it, looking most disappointed. Oh, I like the DA! I learned loads with you. I enjoyed the meetings too, said Luna serenely. It was like having friends. This was one of those uncomfortable things Luna often said, and which made Harry feel a squirming mixture of pity and embarrassment. But before he could respond, however, there was disturbance outside their compartment door. A group of fourth-year girls was whispering and giggling together on the other side of the glass. You ask him. I'll do it. And one of them, a bold-looking girl with large dark eyes, a prominent chin, and long black hair, pushed her way through the door. Hi, Harry. I'm Romilda Vane, she said loudly and confidently. Why don't you join us in our compartment? You don't have to sit with them, she added in a stage whisper, indicating Neville's bottom, which was sticking out from under the seat, again as he groped around for Trevor, and Luna, who was now wearing her free Spectraspecs, which gave her the look of a demented multicolored owl. They're friends of mine, said Harry coldly. Oh, said the girl, looking very surprised. Oh, okay. And she withdrew, sliding the door closed behind her. People expect you to have cooler friends than us, said Luna, once again displaying her knack for embarrassing honesty. You are cool, said Harry shortly. None of them was at the Ministry. They didn't fight with me. That's a very nice thing to say, beamed Luna. Then she pushed her Spectraspecs farther up her nose and settled down to read the Quibbler. We didn't face him, though, said Neville, emerging from under the seat with fluff and dust in his hair and a resigned-looking Trevor in his hand. You did. You should hear my Gran talking about you. That Harry Potter's got more backbone than the whole Ministry of Magic put together. She'd give anything to have you as a grandson. Harry laughed uncomfortably and changed the subject to OWL results as soon as he could. While Neville recited his grades and wondered aloud whether he would be allowed to take Transfiguration Newt with only the acceptable, Harry watched him without really listening. Neville's childhood had been blighted by Voldemort just as much as Harry's had, but Neville had no idea how close he had come to having Harry's destiny. The prophecy could have referred to either of them, yet for his own inscrutable reasons, Voldemort had chosen to believe that Harry was the one meant. Had Voldemort chosen Neville, it would be Neville, sitting opposite Harry bearing the lightning-shaped scar and the weight of the prophecy. Or would it? Would Neville's mother have died to save him as Lily had died for Harry? Surely she would. But what if she had been unable to stand between her son and Voldemort? Would there have been no chosen one at all? An empty seat where Neville now sat, and a scarless Harry who would have been kissed goodbye by his own mother, not Ron's. You all right, Harry? You look funny, said Neville. Harry started. Sorry, Raxpert got you? Asked Luna sympathetically, peering at Harry through her enormous colored spectacles. What? A Raxpert. They're invisible. They float in through your ears and make your brain go fuzzy, she said. I thought I felt one zooming around in here. She flapped her hands at thin air as though beating off large, invisible moths. Harry and Neville caught each other's eyes and hastily began to talk of Quidditch. The weather beyond the train windows was as patchy as it had been all summer. They passed through stretches of chilling mist, then out into weak, clear sunlight. It was during one of the clear spells, when the sun was visible almost directly overhead, that Ron and Hermione entered the compartment at last. Oh, wish the lunch trolley would hurry up. I'm starving, said Ron longingly, slumping into the seat beside Harry and rubbing his stomach. Hi, Neville. Hi, Luna. Guess what? He added, turning to Harry. Malfoy's not doing prefect duty. He's just sitting in his compartment with the other Slytherins. We saw him when we passed. Harry sat up straight, interested. It was not like Malfoy to pass up the chance to demonstrate his power as prefect, which he had happily abused all the previous year. What did he do when he saw you? The usual, said Ron indifferently, demonstrating a rude hand gesture. Not like him, though, is it? Well, that is. He did the hand gesture again. But why isn't he out there bullying first years? Dunno, said Harry, but his mind was racing. Didn't this look as though Malfoy had more important things on his mind than bullying younger students? Maybe he preferred the Inquisitorial Squad, said Hermione. Maybe being a prefect seems a bit tame after that. I don't think so, said Harry. I think he's... But before he could expand on this theory, the compartment door slid open again, and a breathless third-year girl stepped inside. I'm supposed to deliver these to Neville Longbottom and Harry Potter, she faltered, as her eyes met Harry's, and she turned scarlet. She was holding out 2 scrolls of parchment, tied with violet ribbon. Perplexed, Harry and Neville took the scroll addressed to each of them, and the girl stumbled back out of the compartment. What is it? Ron demanded as Harry unrolled his. An invitation, said Harry. Harry, I will be delighted if you join me for a bite of lunch in compartment C. Sincerely, Professor H.E.F. Slughorn. Who's Professor Slughorn? Asked Neville, looking perplexedly at his own invitation. New teacher, said Harry. Well, I suppose we'll have to go, won't we? But what does he want me for? Asked Neville nervously, as though he was expecting detention. No idea, said Harry, which was not entirely true, though he had no proof yet that his hunch was correct. Listen, he added, seized by a sudden brainwave. Let's go into the invisibility cloak. Then we might be able to get a good look at Malfoy on the way, see what he's up to. This idea, however, came to nothing. The corridors, which were packed with people on the lookout for the lunch trolley, were impossible to negotiate while wearing the cloak. Harry stowed it regretfully back in his bag, reflecting that it would have been nice to wear it just to avoid all the staring, which seemed to have increased in intensity ever since he had last walked down the train. Every now and then, students would hurtle out of their compartments to get a better look at him. The exception was Cho Chang, who darted into her compartment when she saw Harry coming. As Harry passed the window, he saw her deep in determined conversation with her friend Marietta, who was wearing a very thick layer of makeup that did not entirely obscure the odd formation of pimples still etched across her face. Smirking slightly, Harry pushed on. When they reached compartment C, they saw at once that they were not Slughorn's only invitees. although judging by the enthusiasm of Slughorn's welcome, Harry was the most warmly anticipated. "Harry, my boy!" said Slughorn, jumping up at the sight of him so that his great velvet-covered belly seemed to fill all the remaining space in the compartment. His shiny bald head and great silvery mustache gleamed as brightly as the sunlight as the golden buttons on his waistcoat. "Good to see you, good to see you. And you must be Mr. Longbottom." Neville nodded, looking scared. At a gesture from Slughorn, they sat down opposite each other in the only two empty seats, which were nearest the door. Harry glanced around at their fellow guests. He recognized a Slytherin from their year, a tall black boy with high cheekbones and long, slanting eyes. There were also two seventh-year boys Harry did not know, and squashed in the corner beside Slughorn, and looking as though she was not entirely sure how she had got there, Ginny. "Now, do you know everyone?" Slughorn asked Harry and Neville. "Blaise Zabini is in your year, of course." Zabini did not make any sign of recognition or greeting, nor did Harry or Neville. Gryffindor and Slytherin students loathed each other on principle. "This is Cormac McLaggen. Perhaps you've come across each other? No?" McLaggen, a large, wiry-haired youth, raised a hand, and Harry and Neville nodded back at him. "And this is Marcus Bilby. I don't know whether—" Bilby, who was thin and nervous-looking, gave a strained smile. "And this charming young lady tells me she knows you," Slughorn finished. Ginny grimaced at Harry and Neville from behind Slughorn's back. "Well, now, this is most pleasant," said Slughorn cozily. "A chance to get to know you all a little better. Here, take a napkin. I've packed my own lunch. The trolley, as I remember it, is heavy on the licorice ones, and a poor old man's digestive system isn't quite up to such things. A pheasant, Bilby?" Bilby started and accepted what looked like half a cold pheasant. "I was just telling young Marcus here that I had the pleasure of teaching his Uncle Damocles," Slughorn told Harry and Neville, now passing around a basket of rolls. "Outstanding wizard, outstanding. And his Order of Merlin, most well-deserved. Do you see much of your Uncle Marcus?" Unfortunately, Bilby had just taken a large mouthful of pheasant. In his haste to answer Slughorn, he swallowed too fast, turned purple, and began to choke. "An apneo," said Slughorn calmly, pointing his wand at Bilby, whose airway seemed to clear at once. "Oh, not much of him, no," gasped Bilby, his eyes streaming. "Well, of course, I dare say he's busy," said Slughorn, looking questioningly at Bilby. "I doubt he invented the Wolfsbane potion without considerable hard work." "I suppose," said Bilby, who seemed afraid to take another bite of pheasant until he was sure that Slughorn had finished with him. "He and my dad don't get on very well, you see, so I don't really know much about—" His voice tailed away as Slughorn gave him a cold smile and turned to McLaggen instead. "Oh, now, you, Cormac," said Slughorn. "I happen to know you see a lot of your Uncle Tiberius because he has a rather splendid picture of the two of you hunting nogtails in, I think, Norfolk." "Oh, yeah, that was fun, that was," said McLaggen. "We went with Bertie Higgs and Rufus Scrimgeour. That was before he became minister, obviously." "Ah, you know Bertie and Rufus too," beamed Slughorn, now offering around a small tray of pies. Somehow, Bilby was missed. "Now tell me." It was as Harry had expected. Everyone here seemed to have been invited because they were connected to somebody well-known or influential. Everyone except Ginny. Zabini, who was interrogated after McLaggen, turned out to have a famously beautiful witch for a mother. From what Harry could make out, she had been married 7 times, each of her husbands dying mysteriously and leaving her mounds of gold. It was Neville's turn next. This was a very uncomfortable 10 minutes, for Neville's parents, well-known Aurors, had been tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange and a couple of Death Eater cronies. At the end of Neville's interview, Harry had the impression that Slughorn was reserving judgment on Neville, yet to see whether he had any of his parents' flair. "And now," said Slughorn, shifting massively in his seat with the air of a compere introducing his star act, "Harry Potter! Where to begin? I feel I barely scratched the surface when we met over the summer." He contemplated Harry for a moment as though he was a particularly large and succulent piece of pheasant, then said, "The Chosen One, they're calling you now." Harry said nothing. Bilby, McLaggen, and Zabini were all staring at him. "Of course," said Slughorn, watching Harry closely, "there have been rumors for years. I remember when, after that terrible night, Lily, James, and you survived. And the word was that you must have powers beyond the ordinary." Zabini gave a tiny little cough that was clearly supposed to indicate amused skepticism. An angry voice burst out from behind Slughorn. "Yeah, Zabini, because you're so talented at posing." "Oh dear," chuckled Slughorn uncomfortably, looking around at Ginny, who was glaring at Zabini around Slughorn's great belly. "You want to be careful, please. I saw this young lady perform the most marvelous back bogey hex as I was passing her carriage. I wouldn't cross her." Zabini merely looked contemptuous. "Anyway," said Slughorn, turning back to Harry, "such rumors this summer. Of course, one doesn't know what to believe. The prophet has been known to print inaccuracies, make mistakes. But there seems little doubt, given the number of witnesses, that there was quite a disturbance to the ministry and that you were there, in the thick of it all." Harry, who could not see any way out of this without flatly lying, nodded but still said nothing. Slughorn beamed at him. "So modest, so modest. No wonder Dumbledore was so fond. You were there, then. But the rest of the story, so sensational, of course, one doesn't know quite what to believe. This fabled prophecy, for instance." "We never heard a prophecy," said Neville, turning geranium pink as he said it. "That's right," said Ginny staunchly. "Neville and I were both there too. And all this chosen one rubbish is just the prophet making things up as usual." "You were both there too, were you?" said Slughorn with great interest, looking from Ginny to Neville. Both of them sat clam-like before his encouraging smile. "Yes, well, it is true that the prophet often exaggerates, of course," said Slughorn, sounding a little disappointed. "I remember dear Gwenog telling me, Gwenog Jones, of course, captain of the Holyhead Harpies." He meandered off into a long-winded reminiscence, but Harry had the distinct impression that Slughorn had not finished with him, and that he had not been convinced by Neville and Ginny. The afternoon wore on, with more anecdotes about illustrious wizards Slughorn had taught, all of whom had been delighted to join what he called the Slug Club at Hogwarts. Harry could not wait to leave, but couldn't see how to do so politely. Finally, the train emerged from yet another long, misty stretch into a red sunset, and Slughorn looked around, blinking in the twilight. "Oh, good gracious, it's getting dark already. I didn't notice that they'd lit the lamps. You better go and change into your robes, all of you. McCleggy, you must drop by and borrow that book on Nogtails. Harry, Blaise, any time you're passing. Same goes for you, miss." He twinkled at Ginny. "Well, off you go, off you go." As he pushed past Harry into the darkening corridor, Zabini shot him a filthy look that Harry returned with interest. He, Ginny, and Neville followed Zabini back along the train. "I'm glad that's over," muttered Neville. "Strange man, isn't he?" "Yeah, he's a bit," said Harry, his eyes on Zabini. "How come you ended up in there, Ginny?" "He saw me hex Zacharias Smith," said Ginny. "You remember that idiot from Hufflepuff who was in the DA? He kept on and on asking about what happened in the ministry. In the end, he annoyed me so much I hexed him. When Slughorn came in, I thought I was going to get detention, but he just thought it was a really good hex and invited me to lunch. Mad, eh?" "Better reason for inviting someone than because their mother's famous," said Harry, scowling at the back of Zabini's head. "Or because their uncle..." But he broke off. An idea had just occurred to him. A reckless but potentially wonderful idea. In a minute's time, Zabini was going to re-enter the Slytherin sixth-year compartment, and Malfoy would be sitting there, thinking himself unheard by anybody except fellow Slytherins. If Harry could only enter unseen behind him, what might he not see or hear? True, there was little of the journey left. Hogsmeade Station had to be less than half an hour away, judging by the wildness of the scenery flashing by the windows. But nobody else seemed prepared to take Harry's suspicions seriously, so it was down to him to prove them. I'll see you two later," said Harry under his breath, pulling out his invisibility cloak and flinging it over himself. "But what are you..." asked Neville. "Later," whispered Harry, darting after Zabini as quietly as possible, though the rattling of the train made such caution almost pointless. The corridors were almost completely empty now. Nearly everyone had returned to their carriages to change into their school robes and pack up their possessions. Though he was as close as he could get to Zabini without touching him, Harry was not quick enough to slip into the compartment when Zabini opened the door. Zabini was already sliding it shut when Harry hastily stuck his foot to prevent it closing. "What's wrong with this thing?" said Zabini angrily as he smashed the sliding door repeatedly into Harry's foot. Harry seized the door and pushed it open hard. Zabini, still clinging onto the handle, toppled over sideways into Gregory Goyle's lap, and in the ensuing ruckus, Harry darted into the compartment, leapt onto Zabini's temporarily empty seat, and hoisted himself up into the luggage rack. It was fortunate that Goyle and Zabini were snarling at each other, drawing all eyes onto them, for Harry was quite sure his feet and ankles had been revealed as the cloak had flapped around them. Indeed, for one horrible moment, he thought he saw Malfoy's eyes follow his trainer as it whipped up out of sight. But then Goyle slammed the door shut and flung Zabini off him. Zabini collapsed into his own seat, looking ruffled. Vincent Crabbe returned to his comic, and Malfoy, sniggering, lay back down across 2 seats with his head in Pansy Parkinson's lap. Harry lay curled uncomfortably under the cloak to ensure that every inch of him remained hidden, and watched Pansy stroke the sleek blonde hair off Malfoy's forehead, smirking as she did so, as though anyone would have loved to have been in her place. The lanterns, swinging from the carriage ceiling, cast a bright light over the scene. Harry could read every word of Crabbe's comic directly below him. "So, Zabini," said Malfoy, "what did Slughorn want?" "He's just trying to make up 2 well-connected people," said Zabini, who was still glowering at Goyle. Not that he managed to find many. This information did not seem to please Malfoy. "Who else had he invited?" he demanded. "McLaggen from Gryffindor," said Zabini. "Oh yeah, his uncle's big in the ministry," said Malfoy. "Someone else called Belby from Ravenclaw." "Not him, he's a prat," said Pansy. "And Longbottom, Potter, and that Weasley girl," finished Zabini. Malfoy sat up very suddenly, knocking Pansy's hand aside. "He invited Longbottom?" "Well, I assume so, as Longbottom was there," said Zabini indifferently. "What's Longbottom got to interest Slughorn?" Zabini shrugged. "Potter. Precious Potter. Obviously he wanted to look at the chosen one," sneered Malfoy. "But that Weasley girl, what's so special about her?" "A lot of boys like her," said Pansy, watching Malfoy out of the corner of her eyes for his reaction. "Even you think she's good-looking, don't you, Blaise? And we all know how hard you are to please." "I wouldn't touch a filthy little blood traitor like her, whatever she looked like," said Zabini coldly, and Pansy looked pleased. Malfoy sank back across her lap and allowed her to resume the stroking of his hair. "Well, I pity Slughorn's taste. Maybe he's going a bit senile. Shame, my father always said he was a good wizard in his day. My father used to be a bit of a favorite of his. Slughorn probably hasn't heard I'm on the train, or—" "I wouldn't bank on an invitation," said Zabini. "He asked me about Nott's father when I first arrived. They used to be old friends, apparently. But when he heard he'd been caught at the ministry, he didn't look happy. And Nott didn't get an invitation, did he? I don't think Slughorn's interested in Death Eaters." Malfoy looked angry, but forced out a singularly humorless laugh. "Well, who cares what he's interested in? What is he, when you come down to it? Just some stupid teacher." Malfoy yawned ostentatiously. "I mean, I might not even be at Hogwarts next year. What's it matter to me if some fat old has-been likes me or not?" "What do you mean you might not be at Hogwarts next year?" said Pansy indignantly, ceasing grooming Malfoy at once. "Well, you never know," said Malfoy with the ghost of a smirk. "I might have moved on to bigger and better things." Crouched in the luggage rack under his cloak, Harry's heart began to race. What would Ron and Hermione say about this? Crabbe and Goyle were gawping at Malfoy. Apparently they had no inkling of any plans to move on to bigger and better things. Even Zabini had allowed a look of curiosity to mar his haughty features. Pansy resumed the slow stroking of Malfoy's hair, looking dumbfounded. "Do you mean him?" Malfoy shrugged. "Mother wants me to complete my education, but personally, I don't see it as that important these days. I mean, think about it. When the Dark Lord takes over, is he going to care how many owls or newts anyone's got? Of course he isn't. It'll be all about the kind of service he received, the level of devotion he was shown." "And you think you'll be able to do something for him?" asked Zabini scathingly. 16 years old and not even a fully qualified wizard yet." "I've just said, haven't I? Maybe he doesn't care if I'm qualified. Maybe the job he wants me to do isn't something that you need to be qualified for," said Malfoy quietly. Crabbe and Goyle were both sitting with their mouths open like gargoyles. Pansy was gazing down at Malfoy as though she had never seen anything so awe-inspiring. "I can see Hogwarts," said Malfoy, clearly relishing the effect he had created as he pointed out of the blackened window. "We'd better get our ropes on." Harry was so busy staring at Malfoy he did not notice Goyle reaching up for his trunk. As he swung it down, it hit Harry hard on the side of his head. He let out an involuntary gasp of pain, and Malfoy looked up at the luggage rack, frowning. Harry was not afraid of Malfoy, but he still did not much like the idea of being discovered hiding under his invisibility cloak by a group of unfriendly Slytherins. Eyes still watering and head still throbbing, he drew his wand, careful not to disarrange the cloak, and waited, breath held. To his relief, Malfoy seemed to decide that he had imagined the noise. He pulled on his robes like the others, locked his trunk, and as the train slowed to a jerky crawl, fastened a thick new traveling cloak around his neck. Harry could see the corridors filling up again and hoped that Hermione and Ron would take his things out onto the platform for him. He was stuck here, where he was, until the compartment had quite emptied. At last, with a final lurch, the train came to a complete halt. Goyle threw open the door and muscled his way out into a crowd of second years, punching them aside. Crabbe and Zabini followed. "You go on," Malfoy told Pansy, who was waiting for him with her hand held out as though hoping he would hold it. "I just want to check something." Pansy left. Now Harry and Malfoy were alone in the compartment. People were filing past, descending onto the dark platform. Malfoy moved over to the compartment door and let down the blinds so that people in the corridor could not peer in. He then bent down over his trunk and opened it again. Harry peered down over the edge of the luggage rack, his heart pumping a little faster. What had Malfoy wanted to hide from Pansy? Was he about to see the mysterious broken object it was so important to mend? "Petrificus Totalis!" Without warning, Malfoy pointed his wand at Harry, who was instantly paralyzed. As though in slow motion, he toppled out of the luggage rack and fell with an agonizing, floor-shaking crash at Malfoy's feet, the invisibility cloak trapped beneath him, his whole body revealed with his legs still curled absurdly into the cramped kneeling position. He couldn't move a muscle. He could only gaze up at Malfoy, who smiled broadly. "I thought so," he said jubilantly. "I heard Goyle's trunk hit you, and I thought I saw something white flash through the air after Zabini came back." His eyes lingered for a moment upon Harry's trainers. "You didn't hear anything I care about, Potter. But while I've got you here..." And he stamped hard on Harry's face. Harry felt his nose break. Blood spurted everywhere. "That's from my father. Now, let's see." Malfoy dragged the cloak from under Harry's immobilized body and threw it over him. "I don't reckon they'll find you till the train's back in London," he said quietly. "See you around, Potter. Or not." And taking care to tread on Harry's fingers, Malfoy left the compartment.